We start this week's edition of Retrospect in 1994 as the Meadow Lake Tribal Council signed a health agreement with the Saskatchewan government.
It's being called a one-of-a-kind signing, an agreement between First Nations people and the Saskatchewan government. The province and the Meadow Lake Tribal Council have signed a memorandum of understanding, giving Natives an active role in the provincial healthcare system.
It allows for a way for First Nations people, without prejudicing their objectives, to participate in health reform and achieve the goal of better health for their people.
The Native group will now be able to sit on the province's district health boards. They will also be able to access services previously only provided to off-reserve Natives. But all of this brings up the question of whether or not they're endangering their federal treaty rights, something the chief considered and dismissed.
We have to work together. And this whole idea of saying, well, let's pay this, you pay this, and I pay this, okay, let's take that stand, but let's talk about which areas we can pay together and help develop.
Chief Gladue says the agreement will benefit his people, and the minister says it will also be good for the whole province.
The provincial government and the peoples of Saskatchewan stand to benefit a great deal from the participation of First Nations people, because they can teach us about community participation and community development.
Today's signing was just the first step down a difficult path towards complete understanding. But both groups hope it'll set a precedent and allow other First Nations people to follow their lead towards these kinds of partnerships in the future.
And moving forward now to 1998, ADM works to reduce their plant's odor in the border city.
ADM is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to upgrade its current facility. New, technically superior equipment will be installed to help reduce the odor emissions, which have long been an issue in the community.
We've said since we've taken this facility over in the early 90s that, we want to become part of the community. To do that, we have to be good neighbors, and so sometimes some of these things we do that might not be considered money-making at the time, but they're things that we're required to be those good neighbors with, our neighbors to the east, and that's why we do those things.
Wednesday night, close to 40 people attended an open house to air some of their concerns and discuss the impending changes. Plant officials were on hand to personally answer questions and unveil the improvements, including new, high-efficiency packing for the wet scrubbing tower.
It has more surface area than the packing we have now. With that, in conjunction with the increased recirculation rates in our scrubbing columns, we feel that we should have a better chance of reducing our odorous emissions from those particular scrubbers, and then, of course, the stacks that they emit through.
And that is good news for local residents. For years, the smell has led many to believe that the emissions could pose a threat to their health. But according to Radiant International, that's not the case. The private firm was hired by ADM to conduct a health assessment of the plant.
Odor levels can be very different than the toxicity levels, and a lot of the chemicals that are emitted, the sulfur-containing chemicals, you can smell them at a much lower level than what they're toxic. So while there are odor issues, this does not necessarily mean there's a toxicity issue.
Air samples were collected from the 5 major sources of emissions at the plant, and although 71 chemicals were detected in the air, all of the concentration levels were less than required to meet air quality guidelines. Woodminster residents can rest assured. The smell may not be pleasant, but it certainly isn't a danger.
And that's it for another look back at this week in Retrospect.
Retrospect this week is brought to you by Webb's Ford. Worth your while to drive the extra mile. Webb's Ford in Vermilion.